investment in the oil fields, and very soon Iraq will be able, if it isn't already, to pay for itself. That will never happen with Afghanistan. It will never happen as long as we insist on handing control of its main economy, informal economy, to the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. This is not a quantitative or numerical matter, as you ought really to know.
Well, I feel like, again, and I'm honored to say this, I feel like Barack Obama, with all the things that John McCain was saying, he didn't understand. To correct the record, as I recall, I paid pretty careful attention. The Nation, as an editorial, for editorial purposes, did not oppose a military response in Afghanistan. There were a lot of people who wrote it who did. Those were people who you spent most of your career at the Nation agreeing with, and how I spent most of my career at the Nation fighting. But the editorial policy of the Nation called for what Katrina vanden Heuvel called a just response. She published a book called A Just Response, and within that justice was part of which was a military response. Now, I wasn't so interested in justice at the time. I was interested in a military response that would wipe out Al-Qaeda. I never said anything differently. Yeah. And it's unarguable that the United States withdrew resources, military resources, intelligence resources, from Afghanistan to move them into Iraq. It's also unarguable that we lack the number of troops, and particularly trained troops, to fight both of these wars at full strength at the same time. We're having terrible trouble retaining people in our military. We're paying $50,000 retention bonuses to keep people in, and we're still not making the numbers because of the cavalier fashion in which our troops have been treated in Iraq, and the fact that they're fighting and dying against an enemy that did not threaten us at all. It's as if George Bush and the neocons have declared war on the American military. They've weakened it to a degree that is unthinkable. And when you say that, oh, liberals hate the military, well, liberals are actually the people who've been defending the military, and it's Bush and company who've been abusing it.
Well, obviously, I'm not going to be able to shift you on your belief in the innocuousness of Saddam Hussein's Iraq, but I can tell you from a lot of contact with the armed forces in that country, I mean the American armed forces as well as the Iraqi ones in that country, that the United States military has benefited enormously from the Iraqi operation. It's learned a fantastic series of lessons about counterinsurgency. It's learned an extraordinary series of lessons about how to operate in a failed come rogue come failed state, an experience we're probably going to have to repeat in more than one place down the road. It's burnished its credentials as a warrior force in enormous ways, and it's got, for a whole range of very, very highly intelligent and trained junior officers, it's brought them the most valuable thing of all, real battlefield experience. It's been a very strengthening thing, and they're all very proud of it. They don't talk as if they're broken, and they haven't been. If it had been up to you, we would have been out of there a couple of years ago, and Al-Qaeda would now be claiming to have driven us out, and Iraq would be worse than the Congo or Rwanda, and our worst enemies, the worst enemies we've ever had, would be saying with some justice that they inflicted a battlefield defeat on the United States in a keystone, strategic country of the world economy, which Afghanistan is not. Now, to the contrary, we can claim we've inflicted not just a battlefield defeat on them, but also a tremendous moral defeat. We've exposed them and their pretensions to be liberators and people's warriors in front of the people they claim to represent. It is a fantastic, victory.
I don't see any defeat having taken place. Iraq is not a stable country at all. It's entirely dependent on our alliance.
Al-Qaeda in Mesopotamia has been defeated. Al-Qaeda in Mesopotamia has been defeated. Now, to the point of your hero, the one you want to identify, the one you want to identify with, Barack Obama is, if you remember, in favor of taking the war across the Afghan border into Pakistan. As it happens, I'm not against that at all. I thought he was quite right to point out that the real problem is not a lack of troops, but a lack of will to attack the Taliban and Al-Qaeda in its real operational base in safe haven, which isn't in Afghanistan at all. It's in the territory of one of our allies. And that's a very brave thing for him to have said in the circumstances, running as he was, as an anti-war candidate. And I ask you, if you care to ponder the implications of that.
I agree with Barack Obama on that point. It was George Bush.
I'm glad to hear it.
It was George Bush who wimped out when Osama bin Laden and his troops were surrounded at Tora Bora because he didn't have the nerve to take on Musharraf.
I agree with you.
I don't have any brief for the military government.
That seems to be correct from everything.
The point is that is that, Christopher, if you look back at history, it was these liberals, these 90% of liberals, who were right about Afghanistan and right about Iraq and right about George Bush. And back then you had 90% of the rest of the world agreeing with us, and now you've got 70% of America agreeing with us. The only people left on your team is the town of Wasilla, Alaska, and the recalcitrant Christian conservatives
you should
and
cheer
the
up.
Republican Party.
You should just cheer up. You're obviously where you've always wanted to be, in a vast national and international majority. And it seems to matter to you. It seems to matter to you to be part of this. So I wish you.
You sound like Bill O'Reilly now.
I wish you joy of it, but I'm afraid to say, and I would say it if I was the only person to say so, and I would have criticised Bush if he had not intervened in Iraq. I was, in fact, a member of a committee that tried to urge him to do so. It wasn't easy to convince the administration that it was time to get rid of Saddam Hussein. I wouldn't mind if I was one of only 2 people who thought so, or perhaps even the only one. I still think I would have been right.
So, all right, well, let's just tally it up. You've got who knows how many hundreds of thousands of dead, millions of refugees, roughly $1 trillion. George Bush runs behind Osama bin Laden in many, many countries in terms of popularity. The United States prestige is at an all-time low, and we don't have the troops to intervene anywhere else. And we've also got the issue of Iran having been enormously strengthened inside Iraq, and the Taliban reconstituted itself in Afghanistan.
Yeah. Cheer up, though.
Do you think this was a good idea?
Cheer up, Eric, because again, I mean, it's a very interesting article in the New York Times the other day, which confirms a lot of other findings, formal and informal. And most people in the Arab Middle East believe that the Israelis blew up the World Trade Center. I suppose that's not a majority you also want to join. In fact, I'm practically certain that it isn't, though it is part of the reason why the United States is suspected and unpopular in the area, because it is believed, and this is not just the stupid belief of the Arab street, but it's often preached to them by their mullahs and by the propaganda of their regimes, that this is the case, that the United States is a pathetic puppet of the Jewish lobby, and so forth. Well, I don't care if I'm outnumbered by people who think that. I'm never going to think it, okay? That's the first thing. The second thing is there are a couple of things you're leaving out of the account. Colonel Gaddafi of Libya capitulated very shortly after the invasion of Iraq and handed over an enormous trove of weapons of mass destruction and the ability to make more of them not to Kofi Annan, not to the European Union, nor to the United Nations, but to Mr. Blair and Mr. Bush. He said, it's not worth it anymore. It's just, it's too much, there's more trouble than it's worth.
Following 6 years of negotiations
Libya is out of this game. Libya's WMD resources are now exactly where they should be. They're in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, being properly analysed, catalogued, and when needful, neutralised. Now, from analysing that, it was possible to walk back the cat. Where did Gaddafi get this stuff? He's got much more than we even suspect him of having. He's more guilty than Saddam Hussein. Well, some of this stuff quite clearly has come from Pakistan. How can that be? Pakistan is our friend. So we were able to identify and at least partly shut down the AQ Khan network, which connected the whole axis of evil from North Korea to Libya. That's a great non-proliferation success by the administration, of which it doesn't get anything like enough credit. I might add that AQ Khan and Saddam Hussein's chief nuclear diplomat were both in the country of Niger at exactly the same time, for reasons that Valerie Plame doesn't seem quite to have understood, or even to have guessed at. Though they may, of course, have both chosen this fabled resort country for their vacation.
Well, okay,
though I would take leave to doubt it.
I think we've exhausted this issue in terms of the fact that people listening are either going to have been convinced by your view that you and the minority that shares your view that Iraq was a good idea was in fact a good idea, or will not. I have another question for you,
yes,
which is everything else about George Bush, the destruction of civil liberties, the incompetence with regard to Katrina, the increase of the debt by $5 trillion, the economic catastrophe that we're undergoing now, and on and on. I mean, pick any issue, the turning over wholesale of government to religious extremists, the refusal to fund